Welcome, everyone, to Congregation Va-Dor's Touch of Torah this May 9th, 2023. Tonight, Rabbi Barry will be talking about the parsha called BEHAR. Take it away, Rabbi, and give us some great insight.
Thank you very much, Sharon. It's a pleasure to be here. And we're going to be speaking about this passage, which is very, very significant, BEHAR. It has a line in it that when translated into English is probably familiar to most people. But let me give you a little bit of background. This passage is talking about the Jubilee year. And Jubilee is related to the word jubilation. We believe it's from the Hebrew word Yovel. Yovel means a ram. And in this Jubilee year, they announced the coming of the year with the blowing of the ram's horn. And so it became known as Yavel, or in English we call it Jubilee. This was done on 7 weeks of 7 years. In other words, after 49 years, on the 50th year, it would be a Jubilee year. And there was also a Jubilee year after 6 years, because 7's a sacred number. They rest on the 7th day. So the law was that the land should be given a rest on the 7th year. So you plow and harvest and till the land for 6 years. And on the 7th year, according to the Torah, it's given what we call a release, a rest. It's rather sophisticated in that it recognizes that even the earth and the animals, they all need a rest. The day of rest was not just for people. It was a divine sanction that was given to animals. They also had to be given a day of rest, and the earth was given a year of rest on the 7th year, according to this passage, BEHAR. Not only the earth, but also legal obligations. People would be released from them at the 50th year. Now, this seemed a little bit impractical because if you loaned money to someone in the 47th year and you're supposed to pay them back 5 years later, all debts would be released. And so it's not quite understood how that was supposed to work out, but a corollary to that would be that all slaves should be freed on the 50th year. Because many times people became slaves because they couldn't pay off a debt. If you couldn't pay a debt, you would become an indentured servant and a slave. It's believed that this only applied for that type of slavery. If it was somebody who was captured from a foreign nation, then the Jubilee year, it is believed, wouldn't have applied to that person. But if it was a Hebrew and he was enslaved by another Hebrew because of a debt, he also would be released in the 50th year. Modern scholars and historians believe that this never happened, that there never was a release of debts after 50 years. It was completely impractical. And they believed also that the slaves probably weren't released. They don't know that. But they also seem pretty clear that the land could not have been given a rest for a year because it could have caused people to go hungry. They didn't have food preservation techniques like we have now. So they doubt that happened also. Also, according to the Torah, on the 49th year, the land would be given a rest because it was the 7th year. And then on the 50th year, it would be given another rest. So it would go for 2 years without being able to harvest the land. Now, the Torah does say in certain places that you can't plant, but if the crop is growing from previous planting, you can still harvest some of that, but you also have to share it with the poor and with the stranger and with the orphan. So it's regarded by religious scholars and historians as aspirational. It's regarded as this is what people thought would have been a wonderful habit and a wonderful practice to engage in, but they think that it could not have been done because it was not practical. But in this passage is a line right out of Jewish scripture emblazoned in American history, a line that is probably one of the most important lines that undergirds our democracy. And that is a line from this passage, BEHAR. It says, Ukaratem dohor ba'aretz l'chol yoshveha. In English, proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. This line appears on the Liberty Bell of the United States and was seen as a proclamation from the Torah that was the guide and the motto and the slogan for the United States of America. And upon this line, we base our American system of freedom and democracy. Interesting thing about this passage also is that the word for freedom, proclaim freedom or a release from debts, is dahor. Now, in ancient Sumerian language, there's a word that's similar to that. It's adararu, and that also means freedom or release. So we believe that this word comes from the Sumerian, and even the principle of freedom might also have its pagan antecedents thousands of years earlier. But this is one indication of how American-style democracy can be traced back to the Torah. They say that freedom speaks with a Hebrew accent. And this line is one of the reasons they say that. Another reason is because the words on the Statue of Liberty, give me your tired, your homeless, masses struggling to be free, that was written also by a Jewish authoress, Emma Lazarus. So you have these two great proclamations of freedom on the Liberty Bell and the Statue of Liberty, both written by Jews. So you could say that freedom does indeed speak with a Hebrew accent. Another indication of the Jewish antecedents of freedom and democracy, not quite as noble, is on the dollar bill. If you look on a $1 bill, you will see all these little stars, and the shape of the stars is a Jewish star. And you might wonder, well, why would they put a Jewish star on the dollar bill? That was because of a man, his name I believe was Chaim Solomon, who, when George Washington, his army was suffering and they didn't have clothes, they didn't have food, they didn't have anything, he loaned them a lot of money so that they could get through the winter. And in return, Washington said, what do you want in return? And he said, you don't even have to pay me back. I just want my heritage to be recognized by America. And so in return, they put a Jewish star on the dollar bill. They also, people believe, made 13 a very sacred number because 13 is sacred in Judaism. It's unlucky in Christianity, but in Judaism, it's considered sacred and holy. 13 attributes of God, Chitzer bar mitzvah at the age of 13. And so some people think that's why on the dollar bill there's 13 stars, 13 stripes, and the colonies were numbered 13. They could have been divided up in different ways, but they made it come out 13. Some people think that's why. So you could very well make an argument that the United States is not a Judeo-Christian nation. It's a Jewish nation. There's very little about Christianity or nothing about Christianity in America-style democracy. In fact, if you look in the Christian scriptures, you will see that it says, obey ye every law of man and God. And many Christians chose not to side with the colonists and rather side with England because of this passage. A revolutionary war against the king was seen as ungodly and against Christian scripture, which says, obey ye every law of man and God. This was known as the divine right of kings, something which kept Europe in the Dark Ages because nobody was allowed to challenge them. The Jewish people, on the other hand, we've got a lot of chutzpah. We challenge our leaders, we speak up, we speak out, we believe in freedom and not enslavement. And so, but many people think that you could call this a Jewish country, not a Judeo-Christian nation. One final thing before I open it up to any questions, comments, or discussions. Some people might wonder, why do I have this mark on my head? Is this the sign of the Antichrist, the 666? Actually, it's not. What happened was I was performing a wedding ceremony, and it was very, very windy. And in the middle of the ceremony, the wind blew the chuppah over, and it toppled, and it grazed my forehead and my hand. And so I ended up with, I was bleeding during the ceremony, but the ceremony had to go on. And I did say that no act of nature can prevent love from moving forward, so let us continue. And then I also said at the end, this is probably the only ceremony that you've gone to where the rabbi has blood on his hands. And then I turned my hand over, it was bleeding. So that's why I have this little sore here. I got out, I was very lucky. I got out relatively unscathed. Chukotai. Chukotai means my statutes. And bechukotai means in carrying out my statutes. Bechukotai is a lot of ancient laws, commandments, and practices of the Jewish people. And yeah, there's a lot of different statutes there. Most of it is very ritualistic and not all that redeeming. But I might mention it on the on Shabbat. I might mention some of those, but this line is just a towering line from our tradition, so I thought I would highlight and focus that. Proclaim liberty throughout the land.